Hi, I'm Mike Papantonio, and this is Ring of Fire. Corporations in America are turning to respected universities to draft phony research that's going to boost their profits. We'll tell you about it. Congress's approval rating have hit an all-time low. We'll talk about how both corporate money and Tea Party fringe have made a mockery of our democracy. And hospitals are ripping off patients at an astounding rate, and we'll have the details on how American consumers are being gouged by healthcare providers. We'll have all that and more coming up, but right now, just remember, you've entered the Ring of Fire.
You can't change Washington from the inside. You can only change it from the outside.
Grand jury secrecy rules.
For political gain.
The press can find out.
That has nothing to do with politics, but go ahead.
It wouldn't bother me.
Oops.
A few years ago, Exxon made headlines when they began offering thousands of dollars to scientists who are willing to write papers on how climate change wasn't real. Today, corporate money is flowing unrestricted to universities. I have Ring of Fire contributors Joe Cotchett and Mike Burg with me to talk about what corporate money is doing to academic research. Joe, just in the last 3 decades, we've seen the numbers skyrocket where we have private industry packing money into university settings so they can create their own tailored kind of research. I think the number has increased 250% just in the last 3 decades. It doesn't bode well for real science, does it?
It does not. Not only that, Mike, we're seeing in academic centers like Boston, the Bay Area, Texas, they are literally surrounding the universities now with, quote, corporate headquarters to influence the product that they're getting out of publicly paid professors. I mean, BP, all the oil companies, but the biggest offender of all is the pharmaceuticals, because the pharmaceutical companies are raping and pillaging medical schools with money to get beneficial reports back on new drugs that they otherwise would never get.
Michael, I know you see this a lot. You handle some of the huge pharmaceutical cases in this country, but one of the easiest stories to follow is the BP story. It is where BP, we have a report come from a university, Stanford University, and it looks like, it actually looks like there is some objectivity to it. And in that report, what we start seeing is that the professor is talking about how there is a new microorganism, and the new it was Berkeley University.
Right.
But the professor is talking about we have a new microorganism, and this BP spill is not a big problem. 250 million gallons of oil in the Gulf, 11 people dead, an entire ecosystem destroyed. And this professor from UC Berkeley is trying to defend all that. Give me your take on it.
Well, BP has basically bought their way into both UC Berkeley as well as the University of Illinois. One of the dangers here is they're creating non-science. I think Joe hit it on the head. It's not science. They're making this stuff up. They're trying to use these schools to give us some fake science with propaganda. The scary part, Mike and Joe and the audience out there, is they also are attacking people who are doing real science. We've seen this in Big Pharma. We've had professors in Harvard, Jerry Ahorn, who's written about it, where he's told that if he's willing to give an honest opinion about what's going on in Big Pharma, he could not only lose his job, but the school is going to lose their grants. And you combine that with what's going on with the sequester, where $8.7 billion are being taken away from real funding of science. We're all in real trouble here because they're just going to control it.
Joe, isn't the bottom line here, I mean, let's reduce it just common sense. Corporations don't put money in a university unless they expect to get something back. I mean, isn't that just common sense? They don't do this out of the goodness of their heart. They don't do this because they're trying to extract something. That's what we always see, isn't it?
Well, that's the tragedy, and that's the tragic situation that's now developing. The fact of the matter is, I have no problem with corporate America putting money into universities. It's the problem for the quid pro quo. Now, the universities, let's take Stanford, for example, one of our great universities, had tremendous guidelines or very strong guidelines in place as to what could be done with corporate money. In fact, a local newspaper, the San Jose Mercury, found that a third of the faculty at Stanford Medical School had a total conflict of interest when it came to pharmaceuticals. Now, what we have to look at is our national priorities. I don't want to get off into these wars we're fighting, but we're spending $10 billion a month on a couple of wars, Afghanistan and still Iraq. Could you imagine if you took that $10 billion and put it now, as we did after World War II, put that back into universities, but the trend is going exactly the other way. And that's the point that Mike raises, that's the point that you raised, and that's what people are seeing out there. As a matter of fact, it goes so far, the professor from Berkeley that came up with this microorganism that was going to eat the oil, so to speak, right away within 30 days, he was criticized by his fellow faculties. By the way, P.S., nothing else happened. He's still around, still professing the integrity of that report.
And by the way, Berkeley never even changed their standards. That's what's important here. For example, Michael, at University of Florida, here in Florida, they take money. They'll take money from a corporation. But they have guidelines. They say, no, you are not going to tell us who to hire. Now, you just go down the road to Florida State University, just right down the highway from there. They took money from the Koch brothers. The Koch brothers had the last decision on who was going to be hired, what the courses that were going to be taught, how the course was going to be taught, what the content of the course was going to be. As a matter of fact, at FSU, this bonehead of a guy in charge there said, yeah, you can come, Mr. Koch, into our university, and you can just tell us what to do. As a matter of fact, 60 people were interviewed that the Kochs did not agree with, that didn't get the job to run these various parts of the business school there. 60 people that the Koch brothers said, no, we're going to give you the axe. Now, Michael, here's where this heads. Where's the fine line? What does the university do to protect itself?
Well, the problem is that these universities, they need and want this money. The corporations out there, the Koch brothers, the big pharma, they're out there, they're going to give them the money. We ran into this not only at Florida State, but at some of the finest universities in the country. University of Pennsylvania. We said, we want you to do a study. We want you to do an independent study to determine on a particular drug, and Mike, I'm sure you're familiar with this, as to whether or not it would cause this particular problem. After stringing us along for almost a year, they came back and said, we can't do that because we get so much money from the pharmaceutical industry that to do this independent study may offend them, and therefore we won't do it. This is outrageous. There is no science coming out of this, and there's no money being put in there except from the corporations. Very scary.
Joe, what we saw happen, FDR had a great idea. In the 40s, FDR said, listen, we need to get the help from our universities to develop science for health, safety, and welfare of Americans. And we started seeing FDR pump money into universities. At one point, by the 70s, 70% of the money that went through the university came from the government for government research. And then all of a sudden, that's turned upside down. It's completely on its head. Back then in the 70s, only 3% of the money that was going to R&D at universities came from corporate America. How bad has that changed?
Well, it's not only changed dramatically, as you point out, with this sequestration that's now coming. I think the number is somewhere around $6 to $10 billion that universities are going to use next year. However, let me make one further point. What is the motive behind all this? It's not only, as Mike points out, the directing of reports, that is to say, to get favorable ratings, favorable opinions, favorable, quote, scientific reports. What they're also doing is paying universities or donating to universities to give them back a very important product, which is very significant, which are called patents. What they're doing is using university researchers to do all their work and then going to the U.S. Patent Office and claiming that is their patent. And under guidelines that they've now put in place to donate money to, quote, donate, to fund research, small little provisions in there are that anything found and developed will be patented by the donor of the fund of the money. That's a significant, huge problem that universities are now missing out on.
Mike, as far as bias, the British Medical Journal did a really important study in 2010. They found that a pharmaceutical industry funded study through university is four times more likely to reflect the bias of the drug company that was doing the study. Now, that's not just limited to pharmaceutical companies. It's also, we saw with BP, the oil industry, you're going to get the bias there. There's really no other way to control that. I mean, Yale, if you think about it, Yale sent back $20 million to an industry, a corporation that wanted to have too heavy of hand in how they were conducting business. Don't we simply have to say to our university people, you have to draw the line, you have to be bold, or you're going to lose the edge of that intellectual honesty?
Absolutely. Intellectual honesty is where we send our children, and we've gone to universities. The problem you have is that not only, I think 4 times is an underestimate, to be honest with you. I think it's much greater than that. The other thing we have to be careful about when you look at Florida State and now we look at Cal Berkeley and University of Illinois is they're going to pick the professors. And not only are they going to do all the things Joe talked about, but now they're going to be educating the students to their view of thinking of what they believe is the corporate science, the science they're creating. And now we're going to have all these students who are going to be indoctrinated with the corporate mentality that what they're doing is actually honest and true, which it's not. We have to get the universities to say no, a very loud no.
Joe, in about a minute, what we see is the universities, when they're confronted with this, they still give you the illusion that they're in control. As a matter of fact, something like corporate America gives them that illusion. That's really disheartening, isn't it?
It's not only disheartening, Mike. Nowhere do we see that more than down at Stanford, right in the heart of Silicon Valley, because all of these young entrepreneurs are going over to Stanford University and using students and their research facilities over there in the new world of internet and social communications. It's very dramatic in terms of what they're doing to these young students, as Mike just pointed out. It is a culture that they are now developing. It's not only the Stanfords, it's the little schools all around the country that they are, quote, I hate to use this phrase, but buying up.
Yeah, they are. Joe Cotchett, Mike Burg, as usual. Important topic. We're seeing more attention, hopefully, from corporate media on this, but it's a topic we need to continue talking about. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Just ahead, we'll take a look at how hospitals are ripping off consumers by overcharging. We'll be right back with more Ring of Fire.
You're watching Free Speech TV, a network powered by the people.
Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. Over the last few years, talk about health care has been dominated by discussions over insurance coverage. But there's one healthcare topic that's remained undiscussed, but just as important, and that is price gouging. I have attorney and consumer advocate Ben Gordon to discuss that topic. Ben, the hospital industry, the healthcare industry is eating up 20% of our GDP, a staggering number when you compare that to the rest of the world. There are no comparisons. If you take urbanized cultures all over the world, urbanized governments that really aren't much different than ours.
Yeah, and if you look at it since the 60s, it's staggering. It's gone up from 5% to 20%, and some projections, including by the Social Security Administration, are that by the year 2080, it could eat up 70% of our national income, of our average national income. I mean, it's unprecedented. It is a crippled industry, and it is killing the American workers. It's killing our country.
Well, they've been studying it ad nauseum now. I mean, if you take a look at what McKinsey and Company, of course, we see their studies coming out regularly. They've devoted decades to trying to understand what's happening here. And one thing they identify is happening is you have the hospital industry spending almost $6 billion a year lobbying. Now, let me put that in perspective. The numbers, it even dwarfs the defense industry. It dwarfs the oil and gas industry only spends $1.3 billion. What is it that's at stake? Why would this industry be willing to say, you know, we're going to put up $6 billion to protect our profits?
You know, once again, Pap, I think it's just about corporate greed. You know, they want the American public, the American worker, the average man to feel that they have to have better and better increasing technology that is often is not proven because we have a broken FDA, a broken government system that doesn't allow these devices to get the scrutiny they need. So for example, with a company like Stryker, a company like Johnson & Johnson, these medical device companies go to the hospitals, go to the doctors, they work hand in glove with them and they say, hey, doctor, if you will choose this hip implant for $10,000 that cost us $600 to produce, then we'll make sure that we take care of you on the back end. So it's a system that is promoting profit for everyone in the chain except for the guy at the end who has to spend 20, 30, 40% of his yearly income to believe that he's getting good health care.
Yeah, and so one thing we're seeing, you hit on a really good point, and that is the new industry within the industry, and that new industry is making things that we can sell at a 2,000% markup, 1,000% markup. It's not unusual, as we've talked about on this program, to see a pill marked up 2,000%. But what we're also seeing is new technology. I mean, CT scans, for example. It used to be that in the entire United States, I think maybe there were 3,000 CT scans available that could be used. Now there's 10,000. And the numbers are staggering of people that are being pushed through that system because the profit margin is so high.
That's a great example.
A hospital, a CT scan is paid for in about a year. In other words, you buy the CT scan, hospital pays for it because they spend so much money charging.
And it's pure profit after that. And it's throughout the industry, the pharmaceutical companies and the device companies are controlling the decisions, and so that the doctors and the hospitals are in bed with them all make a profit. And another part of the industry that's crippling the entire system for American workers is the insurance industry, the Blue Cross Blue Shields of the world that are dictating to the doctors that they will use a particular company, and that those companies then control the marketplace and drive premiums higher and higher for consumers. The amount that we have to pay for health care and health care insurance in this country is increasing just exponentially every year.
Well, at some point it becomes such a problem that you wonder even whether it's reversible, because they build their own infrastructure, don't they? Right now you have the industry out that is, they're in front of Congress, as I said, spending $6 billion lobbying. But what are they lobbying for? They're lobbying so they can allow Medicaid doctors to mark up an exorbitant amount of money for Medicaid patients. That doesn't mean the Medicaid doctor gets the money. It means the hospital gets the money, or some part of that industry gets the money. So every day they're lobbying, saying we want taxpayers to foot more of the bill. We want taxpayers to pay more money, and it should be just the reverse. We should have a Congress that says, no, we're going to draw the line in the sand. You're not going to be able to show up here every year and say you want more for a CT scan, or you want to be able to charge more for a wheelchair or a cane. But that's what goes on, and taxpayers end up footing that bill. For a cane that should cost $10, they end up saying, well, this is a $60 cane.
That's right, and we've got things a little bit backwards in this country where the pharmaceutical companies and the device companies are dictating what the patients need. The pharma companies, the device companies, let me give you an example. In 1999, there were fewer than 100,000 people a year in this country that got a hip implant. By 2010, a scant 10, 11 years later, there are almost 500,000 people per year that need, supposedly, a hip implant. Now think about that. Right now, 500,000 people a year plus are getting a hip implant because the pharmaceutical industry, the implant device companies say they need one. Well, guess what? It's because they are making, Johnson & Johnson, they're making record profits on these devices that don't even go through FDA scrutiny. That we're trying to get that changed, but up until recently, there is no FDA, they simply file a letter, and in 90 days they can put this device on the market and put it in 500,000 Americans a year, and they send these doctors on trips. They sponsor the doctor's research. They go to the doctors and say, doctor, use our hip implant, and put it in younger and younger people. So we got 30-year-olds getting hip implants in this country because the pharmaceutical and the device companies are dictating what the patients need.
Well, one thing we forget, we hear a business, we'll hear, well, this is a nonprofit charity hospital. That's the new thing, to call themselves nonprofit charity hospitals. Nothing is further from the truth. In these so-called nonprofit charity hospitals, you have rank and file upper management making $500,000 a year. People at the top are making $1 million a year, and they say, well, we're a nonprofit. Well, not really. What they do is at the end of the year, if they have in cash, an extra $100 million, they'll simply take that $100 million and build another wing onto the hospital, build another facility that they call a research facility. It's not a nonprofit entity when you have the people at the top that are making $1 million and $2 million a year in this thing that they call a charity hospital.
And wanting everybody to believe that they're a charitable organization when they're making huge profits, and the consumers, the patients out there, are the ones that can't afford the health care and can't afford the insurance premiums that keep going up, while these people are all getting rich and saying that they're doing it for charity.
Well, if you go to most small towns and you have that thing called the nonprofit hospital, first of all, you have an entire town that believes, first of all, that it's a charitable nonprofit hospital. And then second of all, what ends up happening is the entire town is built around that hospital. Look, it's become such a huge industry now that if you go to New York, for example, you would think, let's take a town and use it as an example. You go to New York, the hospital industry is an employer ahead of Wall Street, ahead of the banks. The hospital industry has such a reach, even in a city like New York, that if you can imagine, how does that translate when you go to small town, like Topeka or some middle America? It becomes the center of that town, and because of that, they wield such huge political influence that they get done what they want to have done, don't they?
It makes for great sound bites. It makes them sound like they're a great corporate citizen, like the Johnson & Johnsons of the world, wanting everyone to believe that they're doing, making great advances in medical technology, when reality is they're selling devices that don't have any proven efficacy, and they're marking them up thousands of a percentage point, as you said, and the consumers can't afford it.
Well, I mean, to put this in, I saw some numbers here. To put this in perspective, if you took a look at the $60 billion price tag, a $60 billion price tag for the Sandy hurricane cleanup, that is what was spent almost just last week in health care. Now, I guess where this is headed is, do you see any way to reverse this? Are they so entrenched at this point, both in Congress, all the way down to the locality, all the way down to the small town where they are the big industry? Aren't they so entrenched that it's very unlikely that this is reversible?
Well, it's going to be difficult. I mean, it's going to require some major backbone by politicians. The Affordable Care Act has some provisions that many experts believe can work if they're allowed to work by Congress, and that we can try to get some things under control. But unless the pharmaceutical companies are reined in and required to prove efficacy and safety of their devices. Take this example, Pap. These companies get $10,000 a piece for hundreds of thousands of hip implants, for example, and guess what? The FDA doesn't require long-term clinical safety, so the device turns out to be a piece of garbage. It hurts people, it kills some people, it has to be ripped out. Patient has to pay for that, and then they have to have another one put back in. So guess what? The company makes another $10,000. They're laughing all the way to the bank. They have no incentive to knock down their costs. The patients keep buying more because they're told they have to. And then what do? We have to get those companies under control. Unless we get the industry companies under control, then we're never going to be able to save money for consumers.
Well, isn't part of the problem, let's just use that example. Let's put that in, say, the Medicaid or the Medicare analysis, okay? In the United States, if you compare the United States, what we pay for Medicaid treatment such as that, and you compare what Congress has said taxpayers have to do to foot part of that, part of the bill, you compare that to almost anywhere in Europe, it's 4 times as high that transaction is going to cost, because the people at the top simply determine how much, what the bill is. Yeah. Germany, for example, if you just take a CT, we were talking about CT just a minute ago, if you just took a CT analysis, in Germany, when you compare what they charge for CT to what taxpayers pay in the Medicare program for somebody to get a CT scan over here, it is 4 times as high. So I don't know that there's any solution, any quick solution, when you have an industry that's paying $6 billion a year to lobby Congress. And again, compare that to even the oil and gas industry, where they're only spending $1.3 billion. Is there an easy way out of this?
I don't see an easy way out, particularly as you point out, when great countries that have very good health care, charge a fraction per capita for the same kind of care. We have a system here that's broken, and it's going to be many studies and experts are saying now it is the single greatest threat to the security of our country as a whole facing us in this century.
Well, and Ben, when you really step back and look at this whole, all these issues around Obamacare, and you say, is this going to actually change this problem? In fact, in many ways, it makes it worse, doesn't it?
There's no question
the
about it.
healthcare reform is stretching to call it really reform in terms of what it does from a financial standpoint, doesn't it?
There's no question. It's a grave crisis in this country. The American people are paying for it. They're going to continue to, unless our country, leaders and especially the FDA and Congress develop a backbone and hold people accountable for these escalating costs.
Too much money flowing to Congress from the industry right now. Ben Gordon, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Pat.
When we come back, we'll take a look at how the Tea Party has helped make this one of the worst congressional bodies in American history. I'm Mike Papantonio, and you're watching Ring of Fire. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. Congress currently has approval rating lower than Dick Cheney, a man who once shot his friend in the face. But because of the influence of corporate money and Tea Party crazies, our Congress is quickly going down as the worst in history. I have Howard Nations with me now to talk about that. Howard, it would seem like you'd really have to work to have worse approval ratings than the Bush Congress, but I think they've accomplished it here with this Obama Congress. It is the worst, maybe in certainly in 7 decades. Approval rating is just dismal. What do you make of it?
Well, what I make of it is that the people who are answering the polls are very perceptive. There's a 15% approval rating of the Congress. My only question is, who are the 15% that think they're doing a good job?
Well, I mean, the things that are flying in people's face now. We see this week these congressmen, congresswomen who thought that, by golly, they understood what their constituents wanted, and they went and they voted against background checks. Okay, so right now you have them plummeting 17, 18, 19 points in their various districts. And I suppose it's going to take that. Here you had a situation where 90% of the public said, yeah, we do want background checks. The Congress defied them. They defied public opinion. And maybe there is a chance that the voters will remember that. But historically, we don't really see that. In other words, we'll see a plummet like that, 17 or 18 points, but it turns right back around because Americans have such a short memory on things like this, don't they?
Well, the senators who had the 17 and 18 point plunges are not up for re-election, and it'll be years before they come up for re-election, and this will be history by then. The best example of how the Congress right now, we have a Congress that is of the lobbyists, by the lobbyists, and for the lobbyists. I mean, that's what it's all about, and it's manifest just this week when we saw that the Congress passed $436 million purchase of Abrams tanks, despite the fact that the Army says we don't want any more Abrams tanks. And 57% of the public says we want cuts in defense spending and in military spending. Why do they do that? Because the lobbyists, the defense contractors, have the Congress in their pocket. So they're passing. This is one of the few things that the Republicans, Democrats, House, and Senate all agreed on. They agreed to $436 million for Abrams tanks that we don't need.
Well, I mean, we saw that just last couple of weeks, the story of the fertilizer plant down in West Texas, down your way, and we saw that time and time again, the locals were asking for government to get involved. They actually went to Congress and they said Homeland Security needs to take a look at what's happening here. Congress sat on their hands. The very people they went to and said, we need you to take action, completely ignored it. And it was apparent why they ignored it, wasn't it, Howard?
Well, it's apparent why they ignored it for two reasons. One is the Congress. First of all, they've gutted all potential regulations. They've gutted OSHA. There has not been an OSHA inspection of that plant since 1985. And this is a plant where 15 people are killed, 11 of whom are first responders, 200 people injured. They were storing 1,350 times as much ammonium nitrate as you can store without reporting it to Homeland Security. They didn't report it, but OSHA can't inspect it because OSHA has been completely gutted by Congress, which begs the question, why would Congress gut OSHA? The answer is Koch brothers, chemical manufacturing industry, who wants no regulation whatsoever on things such as this. The Koch brothers, who are the 5th largest polluters in America, they spend big millions and millions and millions of dollars for Congress, so they get things like the gutting of OSHA. And
well, this is a great example. Here on this case, Howard, you actually had some OSHA workers saying there's something wrong here. They needed help from not only the state government, they needed help from the federal government. They needed Homeland Security to come in there and understand that there were violations that were taking place every day. But when they went to Washington and they said, look, we have a problem down here, the reason Washington didn't respond was because of the lobby money. It was just exactly
totally.
With the same thing with the gun industry. It was the gun industry comes up with 800, just a staggering, what was it, $800,000 in a period of about 3 days that they just spread out among Congress people, and then all of a sudden the background checks go away. This was the same thing right there in that fertilizer plant in West Texas. My point being is it has as much local impact as it does national impact. You talked about OSHA. The number I saw with just the way they've been gutted, and that is somebody who looks out for your local interests, the safety of workers, the safety of health, safety, and welfare of workers of all types in a given industry. But if they've gutted it so bad that it would take 98 years for the few number of OSHA workers that are out there to inspect the plants that need to be inspected.
Well, you have to understand, too, that in addition, we have the problem in Texas that this mental midget we have for a governor brags about the fact that there are no regulations. They tell businesses, come on into Texas because in Texas you will be unregulated. And this is exactly the product of that type of collaboration between the Congress yielding to the lobbyist and the governor, the state government, yielding to business interest.
Well, we also saw this, but here again, there is such a disregard by this Congress for what they just absolute disregard that we talked about last week. The story where you had in the dark of the night, you had President Obama sign off on a bill that allowed the top management of government, 28,000 government workers that were able to hide and able to keep secret their personal investments, where we didn't know what the conflicts might be. We didn't know what the bias might be, because this president signed off. Congress was almost unanimous on the idea that they didn't want to disclose this information on the internet, for example, where people could research and say, well, before I vote for this person, let me see what their interests are. So they have a notion to where public opinion doesn't really matter to them, does it? That's the way it appears.
Well, public opinion doesn't matter to them because if you see voter preferences in the polling today, voter preferences, 92% want deficit reductions. Not going to happen. 92% want they want to have less spending. That's not going to happen. And then everything that we have, there's the 50% want climate control, climate change, legislation for climate change. That's not going to happen.
Right, but nevertheless, and matter of fact, they're saying all we want is some significant defense spending, but then the defense industry comes in and they complain when it's even 1%. They talk about reducing 1%, and the defense industry goes crazy, but the American public understands we're squandering money, but
Yep.
Congress is unresponsive to what the American public wants right now. That's what's so frustrating to the average voter.
Absolutely, and with good cause. The average voter on that is absolutely correct because they're getting nothing out of all the polls that are out there on what the American public wants. Absolutely none of them are being met.
In other words, if you take the top 10 most important issues, the last numbers I saw, almost the top 10 most important issues, things like health care, climate, defense spending, the very important that are important to the American public, Congress has taken little or no action, has ignored the will of public opinion, has ignored the desire of public opinion, and doesn't seem to be concerned at all. Now, you mentioned one other thing earlier in this interview, and that is that the real goal here has been to dominate Congress so completely with money to where you can bring about things like deregulations. For example, right now, most people care about whether or not their food is going to have the ability to kill them or cripple them if they eat their food. But right now, you've had the food safety industry has been just completely gutted. And that's just another example. How did that happen? It happened from lobbyists, didn't it?
Absolutely happened. It happened from very effective lobbying. And a lot of what we see is the lobbyists are former congressmen. The lobbyists are former staff members for current congressmen. For example, if you want to see how Congress works, let's look at the Senate Finance Committee with Senator Max Baucus. The New York Times reported that 28 ex-staffers have lobbied on tax issues before the Congress, before their former boss. And the Times has said that many of the lobbyists have already saved their clients millions, in some cases billions of dollars, after they go back to their former boss, Senator Baucus, and get him to back their request to extend certain corporate tax perks. And so Senator Baucus is now coming up for retirement. He's already announced he's not going to run for re-election. It'll be very interesting to see if he goes to work as a lobbyist, which he very probably will.
Howard, explain how it's become a big business for senators and congressmen to leave Congress and make $1 gazillion after they serve.
Well, the poster boy for this was Representative Billy Tauzin, a Republican from Louisiana, who was the floor manager. He was a committee chair in the House, and he's the floor manager for President Bush's prescription drug bill in 2005. This is the drug bill where they said that the federal government, the largest purchaser of drugs in the world, shall not negotiate with the drug industry on the price of drugs. Tauzin nurtures that through, and then he retires immediately. Since he retired, in the 5 years after his retirement, listen to this, Tauzin was paid $19,359,000 as a lobbyist for pharma. That's a 110% increase in salary. This raises two issues on how lobbyists work. One is they're paid for what they're doing while they're in Congress. Tauzin was clearly paid for what he did for them, the billions and billions of dollars that he strapped on the backs of taxpayers to pay full price for prescription drugs. That's what he did while he was chairman of the committee. And then they get paid for what they do after, when they go back in and they lobby their former friends and their former co-workers in Congress.
Howard Nations, thank you for joining me. Republicans love to tell us that corporations can always do a better job than the federal government. This is why they're trying to privatize our public education system. I'm joined now by investigative journalist Rick Outzen to help explain the push for privatization. Rick Outzen, the new craze among the crazies is the use of the parent trigger legislation to where we can do away with with public schools entirely, replace them with private schools. Tell me this parent trigger scheme that's coming out of the crazy.
It started out of the California. Of course, it made it immediately to Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, but it allows parents, supposedly, it sounds like a great democracy where parents can vote to, if their school is failing and 50% plus one of the parents sign a petition, then they can vote to do away with the school being part of the public school system and move it into the charter school system, or even close the school. But we're talking about a $500 billion business when we're talking about public education. So all the sharks are swimming around because they see money on the table, and they're putting a lot of money behind these efforts.
Well, I mean, the people putting money behind this, first of all, it's another grassroots scam, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's another Koch brother kind of tea party, a grassroots scam. It looks like a grassroots organization. It's not. It's paid for by Wall Street. It's paid for by the Bill Gates Foundation. It's paid for by the biggest. If you go down this list, my God, it's just like a list of rogues. All Wall Streeters that see the opportunity to close down public schools and take in building out these private schools, and there's trillions of dollars at stake here, isn't there?
Right, there is, and there's no ethics involved in how they do this, Mike. In Florida, fortunately, the Florida Senate turned down the parent trigger bill this year. They did it last year, but the big group behind it's called Parent Revolution, which is backed by the Gates, backed by the Walton family, of course, Walmart. And they even created a fake grassroots group called Sunshine Parents. They had a video, they had 2,000 petitions. Jeb Bush's group took that video and delivered it to all of the legislatures in Tallahassee here in Florida. And we found out, the Miami Herald did a great job, it wasn't real. There was no corporation, there was no web presence. They created this group. And now we're finding that people that they had on that petition didn't sign the petition. So there's just they don't follow the rules that the rest of us have to follow.
Rick, this parent revolution that you're talking about, the numbers that I saw, they received almost $15 million from millionaires and billionaires, mostly tied into Wall Street, and people like the Walton family, as you pointed out, with Walmart, and Wall Street. Goldman Sachs actually was behind the effort. So why is it, I mean, isn't this the thing we have to answer? Why is it that Wall Street is so interested in closing down public schools? Doesn't it have to do with, first of all, they get to go in and fire all the union workers?
Right.
Well, there'll be no union issue there. Second of all, they get to teach their ideology in that private school. They get to teach whatever it is that they might want to teach. If they don't like the idea of climate change being taught, they don't teach it. They start controlling all of what happens in this new education setting, don't they?
Right. Well, we're looking at this $1 trillion business, and for them, they see dollar signs. Think, Mike, they can eliminate the union. They don't have to pay any pensions, any benefits to their workers. So they can, the money that public education, it's still going to be paid by public tax dollars, but they want to pocket it, not put it back into the children. And the way that they campaign, in California, they've got 2 school districts that are falling under it, and we find in both the districts, the parents are misled about what they're doing. They don't realize that it's going to be getting rid of the teachers that they love so much in their schools. They don't realize that their family members that are teachers are going to lose their salaries, lose their benefits. And we're finding in California, there's a move now to try to figure out how can we take it back from the charter schools.
Well, one thing we saw in California, I mean, there were accusations of bribery and extortion and really such heavy-handed harassment of the parents to get them to sign petitions that actually the Justice Department should have been involved in it if you really take a look at this story, because it was all a lie. It was a lie again. It wasn't a grassroots organization. It was a bunch of billionaires who simply want to cash in on education. Isn't that what you see?
No.
In about 30 seconds, Rick, what is your call on where this goes?
Well, what we're seeing right now is the parents are starting to get organized. The PTA in Florida, they were the big heavy hammer that stopped it here. It's going to take, well, you and I have always talked about, is that the teachers, the parents have to organize, have to get their act together to come against. They're against a whole lot of money, but we're seeing both in Florida and in Tennessee, we were able to stop it this year. Louisiana's starting to look at a way that they can take it back.
So Rick, there is momentum by the parents, and that's the key, isn't it?
I believe it is.
Rick Outzen, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Mike.
The diabetes drug Actos has been linked to seriously severe risks, including bladder cancer. Recently, a jury in California ruled against the maker of Actos, and I have attorney Robert Price with me now to talk about that ruling and what it means for consumers. So Robert, big trial took place, California, Takeda, which is the manufacturer of Actos. We now learn it's another drug out there killing people by way of bladder cancer. No question here. If you've been taking the Actos for more than 2 years or even approaching 2 years, now we learn by way of this trial that you have a 40% increased risk of dying from bladder cancer. The FDA, again, did nothing here, did they?
That's right. The FDA, they knew nothing, and they made the classic mistake of asking the company to continue to give it information, which when you have a company that's making multiple billions of dollars off of a drug, you're going to see what you see here, which is the company lying to the FDA, the company internally trying to figure out how to put fires out, how to paint data in the way that favors it, and how to basically lie to not just doctors, but to the FDA and all the patients taking this drug.
Well, they were able to lie for 10 or 12 years. In other words, they knew that the drug, even before they put it on the market, what we saw is, even before they put the drug on the market, they knew the drug would cause cancer, very specific kind of bladder cancer in rats, okay? Mm-hmm. They rather than disclosing all of that, they start covering it up. They start changing the clinicals. And then what ends up happening is the FDA, from what I could see, does what they usually do, and they don't do their job. They don't ask the important questions. Isn't that kind of what happened here?
That's absolutely right. They release the drug knowing it causes bladder cancer in rats. So they invent a theory as to why this won't happen in humans. So the FDA says, okay, well, we'll let you put it in the market and let people take it, but do some data, do some studies. So then years later, and while they're doing the studies, they realize internally that all these other drugs are causing problems. They still do nothing. The studies come out, show bladder cancer, they still do nothing. The FDA still does nothing. No warnings. The drug stays on the market until 2011. It stays on the market for almost a dozen years without any warnings to patients whatsoever about something that they knew before they even put the drug on the market.
Well, what we saw happen in other countries where they have responsible regulatory agencies, we saw in Germany, we saw, well, most of Europe, you saw them either pull the drug from the market as soon as they understood how dangerous it was, or put very specific warnings on it, telling the people who are using this drug that it will kill them by way of bladder cancer. First of all, what is the difference here? Is there something different about the anatomy of the people in Europe that's different from our anatomy, that we simply react differently to drugs? I mean, that's what you almost conclude, isn't it?
It is, and at least in this scenario, and what we saw in the trial in California, which the documents are now public, you see the FDA, in this country, the FDA to come to a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical company and say, hey, this looks dangerous, is it okay? And the companies say, okay, well, what are we going to tell the FDA? And they just spoon feed the FDA. They accept all the premises, they ask questions, and they accept every answer, and it goes on for years and years.
Now, you'll be trying one of these cases next year. You're taking depositions in them right now, and what you're seeing is very apparent at this point that the FDA, some of the very people who got hustled and got brought into this through the FDA, tomorrow they'll be working for the drug industry. Isn't that kind of how it works?
Absolutely. Absolutely. These companies know. Yeah, they know who their friends are on the FDA. They know who will buy their data, accept their premises, and not ask the questions, because just like you said, they either came from a drug company or they're going to go work for a drug company.
Well, first of all, let me ask you this. Is it pretty clear, Robert, that this is not even a drug we needed on the market? There are many drugs that solve the same problem. Explain that, if you would. What's the action of this drug, and what other drugs are out there?
Yeah, this drug is a class of drug called TZDs. And what else is a TZD? You have Actos, that causes bladder cancer. You had Reslin. We remember Reslin. You have Avandia. This is a dangerous class of drugs, and the drugs are unnecessary. You have more traditional drugs like metformin that people can try and don't cause the same dangers. But you also see in these depositions that we're about to take, marketing depositions, where they push this drug onto doctors and they promote all these supposed benefits of the drug, but they never tell the doctors about the important things like cancer. So they employ these marketing procedures to sell a drug that doesn't need to be a first-line defense. It doesn't need to be pushed. It doesn't need to be sold. But that's how it's spun and that's how it's marketed.
So what they do, Robert, from what I take it, I mean, if you understand how these detailers work, for example, the detailer is the salesperson that goes to the doctor's office and sells them the new drug. The way the detailer works is they create this relationship with the doctor. They do things like bring them cakes and cookies and invite them to lunch and dinner, that type of thing. And at the end of that relationship, the important questions really aren't asked by the doctor, are they? And if the doctor asks the important questions, it's very difficult for the doctor to get the truth because of the way that the pharmaceutical company, Cotchett in this company with Actos, hustles and schemes the system, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We saw it in the California trial, and we're going to see it big time here in the MDL, which is where we're working. Millions and millions of dollars spent annually, taking doctors out to dinners, dinner meetings, friendships. I mean, you're talking about.
Hell, I mean, flying them to Japan. I mean, you have consultants that you think are independent consultants, and then all of a sudden you find out they had a relationship where they're playing golf in Japan with some of the people who are pushing this drug. And so I don't know how the average American ever has a chance here. Because, I mean, first of all, if the doctor is a victim, because at the very top you go to your doctor and you say, well, doctor, do I even need this drug? Well, there are 5 other drugs that can do the same thing. Why do I need this drug? Well, the doctor doesn't have the inside information to even be able to advise the patient. The patient is in a quandary here, aren't they?
That's right. The doctor has the sales literature. The doctor can do their independent research, but the independent research does not even show the dangers that the company knew. So the doctors are being played here, and they're passing the same false information on to the patients. The doctors don't know, the patients don't know, and with this drug, there's no warning about cancer.
Robert,
that's a major factor.
Do you advise your clients to, at least before they start taking a new drug, even if the doctor tells them it's a great drug, been out there for 5 years, don't you advise them to do their own independent research, to go out, go on the internet and find out what you can?
Absolutely. It's a just like you say all the time, it's a self-help environment out here.
And the self-help usually begins where? I mean, isn't the one source to go is obviously the internet just search the internet, go into the blogs, go into the chat rooms, find out what's going on with a particular drug. Sometimes it's terrifying if you are taking that drug, but I think that's where you ultimately get the best information, or at least the best sense of whether or not that drug can cause you harm.
Right.
Robert Price, thank you for joining me, okay?
Thank you. Thanks, Pat.
That's it for this week's Ring of Fire, but you can keep up with us throughout the week online at ringoffireradio.com or on Twitter at Ring of Fire Radio and on Facebook. I'm Mike Papantonio, and we'll see you next week right here on Ring of Fire.